Welcome back to Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. I'm personal financial planner, columnist, and financial therapist Rick Kahler. Research tells us that 90% of all financial decisions are made emotionally, not logically. For nearly 4 decades, I've been helping people make better money decisions. So what makes my financial worldview different from most financial experts? I blend the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Good money decisions are not just about the money. So let's get started with today's episode. I'm Rick Kahler. Thanks for joining me. Well, I don't know if most of you know this, but I'm kind of a numbers geek, which might be a little surprising in that the focus of this podcast is on emotions, right? But I do really love statistics. And I thought it might be interesting to combine statistics because financial therapy is about finance, and finance is about numbers. So as important as emotions are to money, which they're hugely important, the numbers matter too. And I came across an article that I thought was interesting. It was asking people, how much money do you need to have to be considered rich or wealthy? And this is an age-old question. It has many, many answers to it. Probably the best answer to this is it depends, because it really depends on your definitions of rich, your definitions of wealthy. Are they terms defined by your net worth, your income, your overall well-being, which would include emotional and physical? Is it in context locally where you live, nationally, or globally? For example, and I'm forgetting the exact numbers, but it's like the lowest 1% of Americans are somewhere around like in the 64th percentile of income globally. It's like our poorest are in the are 2/3 up as far as what income would be on a global nation. So there's just a lot of factors here that can identify a person as rich in one context and impoverished in another. So today I think I'll focus on the U.S. And I've written a lot about this in columns before. Wealth can be measured in terms of income or in the terms of net worth. Now, IRS measures wealth in the terms of income. So when we're talking about wealth, when we're talking about a person being rich or considering ourselves, we really need to delineate. Are we talking about income? Are we talking about net worth? IRS says that taxpayers making over $540,000 or more are in the top 1% of income earners. Now, making less than 1/10 of that at $43,600 puts a person in the median, in the 50% percentile. And poverty for a family of 4 in 2022 was $27,750 a year. So you can see there's a huge difference between poverty, middle class or median, or the top 1%. Now here's the rub. A large income doesn't mean you're rich, especially if you're living paycheck to paycheck. Now you might say, well, hey, $540,000 a year, I can afford quite a lifestyle. And that could be true depending where you live, right? In Rapid City, South Dakota, you'd probably do real well on that. But not as well. I mean, not poorly, but not as well in San Francisco or Washington, D.C. And you're not rich if you're making $540,000 a year. Now that's before taxes. So you got to take a third of that in most states off the top, at least say 150, 200,000 for the after-tax income. And if you're spending $600,000 a year and making $540,000, you're doing that consistently, you're insolvent, you're bankrupt because you're spending more than you earn. I think I've told you that I once had a client who made around $5 million a year that had a net worth of a minus $3.5 million. So income does not indicate that you're rich. I just saw that, I think it was the New York Yankees signed the ball player that hit 62 home runs this year, I forget his name, for, I think it was around $40 million a year for 9 years. That's $360 million over 9 years. Now, one would think, hey, that's probably rich, and certainly 40 million, which is probably closer to 25 million after taxes in New York, that can buy you quite a lifestyle, right? And certainly a person would have the opportunity to build wealth, but that does not mean that they will if all of that is spent on lifestyle. So I think a better way to measure wealth is in terms of net worth. And Charles Schwab does a modern wealth survey every year where they ask 1,000 Americans between the age of 21 and 25, what's wealth? And they recently did this between February 8th of 2022 and February 27th of 2022. I'd like to go back a little bit. In 2019, this survey found it took a net worth of 2.3 million to be considered rich and 1.1 million to be financially comfortable. In January 2020, right before the pandemic, that had increased to 2.6 million to be considered rich. And to be financially comfortable, it was 934,000. So it had actually slipped a little bit to be financially comfortable. In 2021, the amount to be rich dropped from 2.6 to 1.9 million, down 700,000 than from the year before. And to be happy was down, to be financially comfortable was down to 624,000, which was down quite a bit, a third, $310,000. That's pretty shocking. What was the reason for that in 1 year? Well, you might remember in 2020, the stock market took quite a dive. But between January of 20 and January of 21, if you had a diversified portfolio, your portfolio is actually up 5% during that time. So it couldn't have been a financial decrease, right? Because if you had 2.6 million, it would have increased to a little over 2.7 million in a year. And yet, to be rich dropped to 1.9 million. Obviously, the response to that was far more emotional than it was logical. Imagine that. Our financial attitudes are not always about the money, are always about statistics. What would have happened where people felt so much poorer in 2021? Now maybe it was just the effects of the pandemic. February of 2021 was also after the insurrection and the political polarization and instability that people were feeling through the U.S. I think that could have had a lot to do with lowering the bar for what was feeling rich. So a number of things, but I think it drives home that so often our financial calculations are driven by our emotions. That's nothing new. So let's go to 2022. And in February of 2022, what it took to be wealthy increased by 300,000. So it was up from 1.9 to 2.2 million in 2022. Now, that's still down from the 2.6 million that it was in 2020, just 2 years before. But it was up a little bit. And to be financially comfortable was up 150,000 to 774,000. So it just is always curious to me, the metrics that people use to determine what amount of money that it takes to live a rich lifestyle, right? And I think often what people have in mind of being rich would be, sitting by a pool with a butler serving you martinis or something. I don't know. I would love it if the survey would actually ask that question of how much money does it take to live a rich lifestyle. Because it's curious that when we do a little analysis on this amount of money, and we use 2.2 million, which is rich, according to the average person, that the amount of money that is considered being rich or considered being wealthy doesn't even come close to funding a lifestyle that most people consider rich. So, for example, take a net worth of 2.2 million at age 65. Let's assume you're going to live for 30 years. And let's assume that you're going to die broke, which I don't recommend figuring how much income you can take a year by this method, because it means you're out of money by 95. Well, what happens if you're still alive and going strong at 95? Or what happens if you have some type of a crisis and need to dig into your principal before then? So this isn't a great way to look at wealth sustaining you, but nevertheless, let's do that, because that's how most people figure how long their money would last. So let's take 3.5%, which is around what a 30-year T-bill would be paying today. On 2.2, that's 119,616 a year until age 65. And if we add the average Social Security benefit to that, which is just under $22,000 a year. That would bring the retirement income up to just a little over $141,000. Now, that provides a comfortable, but I wouldn't call it an opulent lifestyle in Rapid City, South Dakota. I don't think it goes very far in San Francisco, where the cost of living is about 3 times higher than in Rapid City, South Dakota. And especially when you consider the after-tax cost of living in California, you would have $110,000 after taxes. Your money would go further in Rapid City, South Dakota, because we don't have a state income tax here, and the cost of living is far less. So again, we have to bring in that local influence when we're talking about rich, when we're talking about lifestyle. So let's look at the net worth of $774,000 in net worth that the 2022 respondents considered financially comfortable. That would provide a guaranteed income of low $42,000 a year for 30 years. If we combine it with the Social Security benefit, that would be just about $64,000 a year. Now, again, location matters. If you were living in Santiago, Chile, $64,000 a year would probably be a comfortable retirement. It'd be reasonable. It'd be a reasonable amount in Rapid City, South Dakota, but it's not going to go far at all in San Francisco, especially after taxes. So I don't know how comfortable that income of, or that net worth of $774,000 really is. Now this goes back to money scripts that we have, money scripts around dollars, where we lock on to this number of 1 million as being a lot of money. It gets into cognitive biases of where we form ideas in a nanosecond without really engaging our cerebral cortex and really thinking about what does that mean. We project all sorts of assumed facts onto these incomes, onto these amounts. And I can tell you, when I tell a client of mine, like my average client probably has a net worth of $2 to $3 million. And when I tell them that the average person thinks they're rich, their mouths drop open. They're like, you got to be kidding me. We are not rich. We do not live a rich lifestyle. And in fact, I would have my average client that had a worth of $2.2 million living on far less a year, or spending far less than $141,000 a year. I like to figure a 3% withdrawal rate, which would be what, $65,000 plus Social Security at 22, about $87,000 a year, because I want the money to last their lifetime and provide a cushion for them in the case of long-term care expenses and non-covered cancer costs and things like that that can arise. So, and that's before tax. $87,000 a year before tax is not anywhere near an opulent lifestyle. So, the facts matter. And we really need to take a look at what blocks us from being present, from looking at reality. And it can be all sorts of things. It's an unlimited number of things that can block us from being curious, being in the present, and saying, so what does that mean? What does $2.2 million mean in what it can buy? Another thing that was interesting in this survey is it found that Americans are really prioritizing their values when investing. We talked about this a few podcasts ago. They found that 73% of Americans agree that their values guide their investment choices. And 69% say they invest in companies that align with their personal values. And I find this very interesting. I think we found that 20 or $25 trillion are invested in SRI and ESG funds that are aligned with people's values. And I think this is, the younger a person is, that the more relevant that value investing is. They found that when looking at factors that influence investing decisions, a company's reputation and its corporate values were almost as important as more traditional factors like a company's performance and its stock price. So again, a lot of emphasis being placed on reputation and corporate values. And we've done a podcast on this that where we looked at the notion that values investing impacts a company, which when you're talking about stocks, it doesn't. It can help you feel more aligned and authentic with what you're investing in, but it isn't enough to move the needle on the company's behavior. We've talked about the fact that a boycott of their services or not doing business with them is far more impactful than not buying the shares of their company. Another thing that the survey found is that this values-centered mindset extends to how Americans also think about employment. 9 in 10 of Americans say that it's important for them to feel fulfilled by their work. That's about 89%. And to have coworkers that respect their personal values, which was 85%. And about 8 in 10, or 84%, say that their values guide how they manage their career. And 63%, that's 2/3 basically, say they chose their current employer based on its values. And I find that interesting because I've attempted to have what is described as a deliberately developmental organization, a DDO, that really supports employees in personal growth. For example, we pay a certain stipend annually for an employee's personal growth, whether they would choose certain types of coaching or therapy or things like that. So I was heartened to see that that was important. I know it is certainly important to my associates in my financial planning firm. And in fact, the survey found that 59% of those surveyed would actually accept a lower salary to work for a company that better represents their personal values and interests. Now that's interesting. And this kind of reminds me, we practice a organizational hierarchy, not hierarchy. It's a organizational governance method called holacracy, where we don't have a hierarchy, a corporate hierarchy, but our org chart is in circles, and we don't have managers or supervisors. And the tech department of the state of Washington may still be formed this way, at least once was formed in a holacratic manner. And the fellow that led that particular division, I think they had about 650 workers at the time, said that they could offer workers in Seattle $100,000 a year and compete with Microsoft that was offering $130,000, because that was the value of working for a holacratic company, which is a purpose-driven company, which typically is going to give workers far more say in what they do, and an ability to really impact the company's values and where the company is going. So values are playing a big deal in the workforce today. And interesting enough, the survey found that nearly half of American workers, 43%, are interested in changing employers over the next 12 months. And Gen Z workers are even higher than that. Finally, to kind of round this out, they ask the survey folks what money means to them personally. And the survey showed that freedom was the top of the list. Flexibility was 23%, and opportunity was 18%. So people found money means freedom, flexibility, and opportunity. Now we know that those answers are money scripts, right? Because we could come up with a number of scenarios where money doesn't buy freedom at all, where money can result in the lack of flexibility and rigidity, and where money can mean a loss of opportunity. So those are all money scripts. What we hope that money can mean to us is it can support our quest for meaning. And that was not asked on the survey. The most significant result in this, both before and after the pandemic, is when they were asked what was most important, people said relationships and health were the most important, and that having money came in third. So and that's very, very in line with lots of other surveys that say relationships and health are the top things that our money can support us in obtaining. So I hope you've enjoyed my little dive into statistics. As always, even in the statistics, the emotions come rushing through. So thanks so much for listening, and I look forward to being with you next week. Take care. Thanks for joining me, Rick Kahler, for another episode of Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. This is where I combine the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Remember, every financial behavior, whether it appears illogical to you or others, makes perfect sense when we understand the underlying beliefs, feelings, and thoughts. Sign up for my weekly blog at financialawakenings.com. I hope you'll join me again for our next episode.